Well, welcome to Tougies Take, episode 22, the most alliterative episode we've had to date. Yeah, right? Yeah, Tougies Take 22, that's 4 T's. And speaking of 4 T's, there's another letter, and it's an A, and I picked one up in Beer League this week. Got myself an apple off the ground like a hungry horse. So things are off to a great start with the season. Significantly less chippy than the last beer league I was in. Thank God.
People are on their toes. What's going on in the hockey world? You never play it too safe.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing too, is like in lower level beer leagues where like people can't skate very well, like let's say you have a rink full of Floridians, it's like usually people get really frustrated because 1 or 2 guys can skate really well, and then they use their powers for evil. That's how I describe it. So needless to say, I use extra size gloves that go up halfway to my elbow to, protect from the slashes. All right, so I figure the best way to start with anything hockey-based is with some warm-ups, or as they call them in Canada, warmies.
So you said you had this new idea of things to throw at me at the start of an episode before we get into our viewer questions and our normal stuff, so let's go for it, Deej.
All right, so I got 5 questions for you. They will either be a yes or no, or an either or, where you will have an option of 2 things or a yes or no. So We'll start with a yes or no. Does DK Metcalf make the Olympics?
Jesus, that was out of nowhere. He never came.
It's just the easiest one, because it's just a quick yes or no.
Well, no.
Okay.
Because he's contracted to an NFL team.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but he's like legitimately trying out for the 100-meter dash.
Oh, then the answer's yes.
Yeah, they're allowing it.
I didn't hear that. That man be fast. That's a yes.
Michael Johnson actually came out and said we won't know if he's good enough until we see how he looks how he looks next to a real runner. I guess and then he was talking about the mechanical differences between an NFL versus sprint running style. It was one of the more fascinating articles I've ever read, because I was just like, yeah, people move their legs and go fast. Wrong. Turns out. Okay, so number 2. Are the Penguins the best team in the East?
No.
Okay. Number 3. Does McDavid hit 100 points in 56 games outside of the North Division?
Ooh, that's a question right there.
I know I smiled when I wrote it down.
Yeah, Deej, topping our own viewers in terms of questions. It's one of the best questions I've ever been asked on this show. I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
And I will tell you why. Detroit and Columbus being in the Central. The California teams in the West. Buffalo, New Jersey, Philly in the East. I still think there are punching bag teams in every division that McDavid could have just absolutely brutalized at some point this season.
Yeah, Connor McDavid could have been the first player in history to record 15 points in one game against the team that should have drafted him. If he played in Buffalo. All right, so we'll go back to the NFL. Does Tim Tebow play in the NFL again?
No. I like Tim Tebow. I know a lot of people are just like, oh, the guy was annoying and this and that. And too much Jesus for my tastes. But
oh, you know what? Sorry, that was an R. Does he pray in the NFL again?
Get out.
No,
he doesn't. So then, this whole idea of him moving to like tight end, like that's just not.
Yeah, he should have done it 6 years ago if it was a valid option.
He would have actually had a chance at that point.
All right, so final question. This is an either or. Who makes the playoffs, Stars or Predators?
Well, we were definitely going to talk about it later on. You were very much on the side of Dallas. I am still very much on the side of Nashville. I think Nashville's going to make it, much to their own long-term detriment.
Yeah, statistically, it's definitely Nashville at this point. However,
this D just kidding.
Dustin
there it is.
Closet today.
The Stars hat is on, ladies and gentlemen. The Stars hat is on.
I remember right after they switched their logo, I was like at a pub eating a sandwich, and some guy came up to me. He's like, "Which MLS team is that?" That's like one of my favorite weird interactions ever.
This is the intro now. Sounds good.
Yeah, so Deej, fun fact here. I mentioned the Stars hat is now on. For those of you who are not watching this on YouTube, you won't notice what else is on in terms of what Deej is wearing. Deej,
True.
to inform the people who are listening, and of course we love our listeners on Spotify and Apple and Google. We love you all. Deej, inform the viewers. What are you wearing?
Well, I'm wearing a Manscaped t-shirt because for the first time in the history of this podcast, we have a sponsor that I didn't make up. So we have a legitimate backing.
We do.
And almost a fiduciary duty, and other words that scare me. But what's fascinating is I live in Florida, right? And you may notice I have a glorious flow, and I like to keep that on top of my head only. And I'm sure you do as well, as a hockey fan and player. Basically, anybody outside of the Yukon, I would imagine you can benefit from this. So
that's bringing a whole new definition to the term bush people.
Yeah. Yes, very true. Yeah, that it does. I know. So you may not know this, but on May 5th, they released their new Lawnmower 4.0, of which they sent us a preview. I don't know if you can use the word preview.
This ain't a preview, baby. This is the real deal.
Basically, they sent us both a ball trimmer, so that way we could use it to make sure it was something we could really get behind. And it is.
Yes.
Especially here in Florida, I've been able to skate in significantly hotter temperatures without lowering my sperm count. It's been fantastic. And really, so here's what like amazed me, right? Anytime I've ever, attempted to buzz cut, if you will, one's walnuts, it ends up looking like a murder scene for an hour or two. There's a lot of blood flow down there. Thanks to years of evolution, making sure your nuts have access to the best nutrients. However, this trimmer, which is crazy, it knows where your skin is and makes it so your nuts don't bleed, which is crazy. This to me is
and preferred.
Yeah, this is right up there with the electric car in terms of inventions.
Oh, God, that it is so... the funny thing is here, everybody, again, not only have Manscaped shared the lovely joy of, again, the wonderful Lawnmower 4.0 with us, they are also giving you the opportunity to enjoy the wonders known as the Lawnmower 4.0. Deej, how can people get involved if they want to join the over 2 million men who have trusted Manscaped? What can they do? What can they do, Deej?
Well, you know what? Here's how you can get 20% off and free shipping with our code. That is Tougie, Tougie, to keep your balls clean. That's right, code Tougie. Use it at manscaped.com. So 20% off, free shipping, manscaped.com, code Tougie, Tougie. Unlock your confidence. Right tools for the job with Manscaped. And in one of the weirder trademark patents I think has ever been filed, your balls will thank you.
And we thank Manscaped for their business.
Big time.
Deej, with that, and again, a big shout out, of course, to Manscaped. So much more that we can say and we'll be saying about this particular product. Trust me. You'll be hearing from us a lot. With that, shall we move in to our patented viewer questions segment, letters to the editor? What do you say we kick things off?
Yeah, I think this is, my mom disclosed to me that this is her favorite section of the podcast. I would imagine she's going to have a lot of questions for me after that ad read. But she said she loves the letters because we get to think on the fly, and then she kind of tunes out the hockey talk. So let's get some questions going.
All right. So, Deej, we stuck with two here because a lot of them are stuff we've talked about before or are in relation to other things we're going to talk about. But we are going to kick things off here, not just from one person. It's a question big enough that it couldn't just be asked by one person. This is from the entirety of Montreal Canadiens fans' Twitter. Why do the Habs suck? What the fuck? Why are they the worst playoff-bound team in the history of the NHL? I'm not making that up. That is the gist, essentially, of the questions I got today in relation from Habs fans. And, I get some of the frustrations. Last night, they got pooped on by Toronto. They lost 5-2, and that's incredibly frustrating. But, Deej, here's a big part of the reason as to why I like to laugh at Habs fans. Because, my God, are you overreactionary? You are an incredibly overreactionary bunch. I don't know if it's something in the water, if it's something in the poutine. I don't know what it is. But there is something, Deej, that can have them go from the beginning of this week, or really we'll say last week, because they've only lost 2 in a row, from saying, LOL, we're going to catch Winnipeg, to now, after losing to Toronto, we are the worst playoff-bound team in history, which isn't statistically true yet. Give it time. We'll see if you finish ahead of St. Louis. But, yeah, to that point, Deej,
or
thoughts
Calgary.
On the Habs. Or Calgary. You never know. Who they're still 10 points above.
Yeah, let's see if you finish ahead of Calgary first. Technically, there's not a mathematical elimination there yet. So I know I've shared my friend AJ's theory on what makes a great hockey team before, where you need 2 superstars, a stud defenseman, and an all-world goaltender. That's what you need to be a conference final elite hockey team. So when I look at the Montreal Canadiens, I think you would agree with me, and I think any Habs fan in the entire world would agree with me. Their best player is Tyler Toffoli, right?
This season, yeah. I mean...
this season.
Jeff Petrie obviously gets a bit of a shout up there for defense, but I mean, yeah, imagine that team without Tyler Toffoli.
So from there, I don't think we can use my litmus test of a secondary offensive superstar on any one of their next 4 leading scorers. Like, no one outside Montreal is buying a Nick Suzuki jersey. No one's buying a Thomas Tatar jersey. No one's buying a Josh Anderson jersey. And I think the issue with this team is, if we can call Tyler Toffoli a superstar, which I think based on his performance this year in a bottle, he has been elite. I think he's going to have a hard time selling jerseys outside of Montreal, outside of Quebec even. And so I think the lack of extremely high-end all-league players where, in a weird way, Montreal is almost made of 4 second lines, I think is a great way to describe it, at least in terms of how I think.
I don't disagree. I mean, because you look at like Brendan Gallagher, Jonathan Drouin, it's like, are those the guys on the top line, or are they like the guys that really make an elite second line run?
Yeah,
I agree with that.
They are. They're great second liners. It's like for years on the Panthers when Stephen Weiss was our best player. He's the best second line center in the league. He's on the Panthers first line. That's I feel the same way about this team. Not that they're comparable to those bad Panthers teams, because they have a lot of depth and guys with skill, but inconsistency. And I think it's the lack of inconsistency, the lack of name brand players, the not necessary question marks at goaltending, but Jake Allen and Carey Price, you know what you're going to get. I think Carey Price isn't going to suddenly wake up and play like he did 5 years ago. So I don't think Montreal's bad. Let me thoroughly say that I believe this is a good hockey team, but it is not a great hockey team.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is with the Habs, like the goalposts have changed a lot this season, right? Like start of the year, it would have been like, okay, they might be a playoff team, right? Like honestly, I think at the beginning of the season, a lot of the conversation was, okay, you presume Edmonton's going to make it because of the McDavid factor. Toronto's probably going to make it. And then a lot of the conversation was, oh, well, Calgary or Vancouver, more than likely over Montreal. And then obviously at the start of the season, Montreal goes on that incredible heater, and then all of a sudden, you know, and it's infamous at this point, but Chris Johnson of Sportsnet calls them a juggernaut. And yeah, like the expectations went up that much faster. And then obviously the decline hit, you fire Claude Julien and make those changes, you know, goalie coach as well. It's like the goalposts have changed a lot. I think if you were to ask a Habs fan at the start of the season, look, you have 3 games left. Right now, you're 10 points above Calgary and 14 points above Vancouver, and you're going to make the playoffs. I think Habs fans would have taken that. And I think they can't, that fan base can't lose sight of this. Heading into this year, even with the addition of Toffoli, with the addition of Josh Anderson, it wasn't going to be like, cup contender, we got this. Like, I'm not saying you were wrong for buying in with how well the team did at the start of the year, but I do think any Habs fan that genuinely thinks we're going to be one of the worst teams to ever make the playoffs. I mean, I think you're looking at it the wrong way. I think, hey, you're playing with house money here. You are ahead of where you thought you were going to be. Again, start of the season, Calgary gets Markstrom. Vancouver's still Vancouver with the likes of Pettersson and everyone else. I think you would have taken being one of the 4 teams to make the playoffs, regardless of what seed it was. So it's all about perspective, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, and with that,
and I think there's no negatives to the playoffs either. Like, what happens? You draft 18th. I don't know. Just to finish any other question they could ask. I don't know.
Well, yeah,
it's not a bad place.
That I agree with, right? And I've talked about this with other teams. The benefit of missing the playoffs, where it outweighs the positive of making it. For example, the New York Rangers. And trust me, we'll be talking about them a lot today. Still.
Yes.
And I will say this before I forget, actually. We were going to do our updated awards last episode. And then obviously the Tom Wilson stuff happened. And then this episode, there's still way too much stuff to talk about. So we will get to our updated award predictions probably at the end of the season at this stage. It just makes sense to let the regular season finish. We'll give our opinions and then we'll revisit that once the awards are actually handed out. So just to update you on that. But to that point, the New York Rangers, is it more beneficial for them to make it or to miss? For me, my argument has been for them to miss. Because I still think, and while obviously apparently ownership disagreed, I still think the Rangers were, in that situation where one more good first-round pick is way more worth it than taking your shot against Pittsburgh, Washington, or Boston in round 1. I think that's way more valuable to you. Montreal, on the other hand, I think for the most part, that core it's pretty much intact. Yes, they are lacking, you could say, secondary stars, but of course, obviously, they've had the arrival of a superstar, who we'll talk about, of course, in Cole Caulfield. I think, you compare Montreal to the Rangers. Yes, the Habs could benefit from a lower pick, but probably not as much as, say, the Rangers would. Same thing for the Arizona Coyotes. They could have made the playoffs. They're not going to at this stage, barring a miracle. It's more beneficial for Arizona to get another draft pick. Well, I mean, then again, do they even have their, what was it? No, it was last year's picks that were forfeited. I think they may have forfeited a pick this year as well for the whole thing. Let me look that up really quickly. Arizona doesn't even have their own first round pick. I believe it's their first. That's right, it's this year. So in a normal scenario, it would have been more beneficial for Arizona to miss because, hey, you get that extra draft pick because it's clear you're not there unless you go on this miracle run. So for Montreal, you've made the playoffs. Anything can happen. I genuinely think with Montreal, when talking about the thought of playing at Toronto or playing in Edmonton in round 1, where they'll finish in the standings. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But yeah, for Montreal, there's really no need to panic. Deej, do you have anything else to add, or do we move on to our second and final question?
The only thing I'll add is when you say, which draft pick's better and where do we get it? Something interesting I think about this draft because of the lack of scouting around it is, and this is probably pushing the numbers a little bit too far to the left and right, but I think every pick from 10 to 50 is like a blob of very similar skilled players that scouts might not have been able to differentiate on the level they would have in other years.
I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of been the go-to sentiment when discussing the draft because of, like you said, the factors of the lack of scouting and everything. To me, that doesn't devalue those picks as much as it does to other people. But yeah, it's definitely not your normal draft year. If anything, I'm not going to say it'll make the picks more valuable, but it really does seem like you have a better shot of, man, we really hope this guy's still somehow on the board. And in a normal year, there's no way he would be. But this year, he definitely could be. So I don't know. Obviously, the draft itself is going to be interesting. We'll move on because, again, we have a lot to talk about today. This other question comes from AJ. One team that's not going to make the playoffs this year that'll make it next year. So initially I thought it was, hey, who's making the playoffs this year that won't make it next year? But it is the inverse. I guess we could answer both. Actually, yeah, let's answer both. So, Deej, the first question that I'll ask. Like that. Who is going to make the playoffs this year that will not make it next year? And I have a hunch, a suspicion that your answer is going to come from the Central or the West.
So initially, I was thinking about that. And I want to grab a different answer. But I can't. I have a really hard time doing it. So I would say that either Nashville or St. Louis are prime candidates to miss next year.
Those are the two that really stand out. I'd say Nashville more than St. Louis.
Yeah, I agree. Nashville, their run into a playoff position this year felt like a real patchwork of luck and just running by the seat of their pants. And that's not sustainable.
It's amazing what UC Saros has done. So yeah, those are the two obvious shouts. But then we get into the teams that aren't likely to make the playoffs this year that could make it next.
I think there's an obvious one.
Dallas from the Central.
Yeah.
Chicago has a shout as well from the Central. In terms of the West, I mean, could Arizona, LA, or San Jose make it? Maybe. It would require a decent turnaround.
LA's probably Rangers, the favorite of those three.
I don't know. The Rangers or the Flyers, another big shout. Like, there are a lot of, I don't know if I'll say playoff caliber teams, but a lot of teams on the outside looking in that you could say, oh yeah, I could see them making the playoffs next year. The problem is,
I think the Rangers are the most likely.
Philly for me still stands out though, because I'm still in shock. And the thing is, like, Hofstra asked the question of like, oh, what did they change? And obviously we've talked about that a ton, so I didn't really want to address it again.
The coach.
But it's still one of, if not the most shocking things to me that's happened in this season is that the Philadelphia Flyers have missed the playoffs and missed it by a decent amount. I still can't believe it.
Yeah. I think it was momentum. When they first realized they were not performing correctly, I think that got into everybody in that locker room's head at the same time. And then it just never got coached out of them.
Kind of, I guess, what would have happened to St. Louis had they not fired Mike Yeo and brought on Berube. That's what it feels like. Yeah. The St. Louis comparisons are incredible. So, yeah, there we go. Quick answers to those ones, but I did like that particular question. Deej, with that, we didn't bury the lead in the last show. We have buried the lead a little bit in this one. Shall we move on to our general hockey talk conversation? Shall we talk?
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Well, let's get the good story that came out of this out of the way first, I think. Is the best way to start this off.
Yeah. So obviously we are alluding towards the Rangers and Caps follow-up. And again, friendly reminder, if you didn't hear it, the last episode, Deej and I talked everything about the Tom Wilson incident and how that all played out. Deej ruffling some feathers with his opinion, which I personally loved. I thought that was hilarious. But that said, what happened with the Rangers and Caps? Before, like Deej mentioned, talking about the negatives, let's talk about the positive here. And what should have been the focal point, the main takeaway from Wednesday night's game. And that was that TJ Oshie had one of the best moments in recent hockey history, scoring a hat trick the day after his dad passes away. The fact that moment was, and I'm sorry, but it was overshadowed by all the other nonsense going on. It's a damn shame because that is one of the feel-good moments, I'd say, in the history of the NHL, DeJ.
I agree 100%. And it wasn't, and I think there's an extra layer added to this by the fact that Tim Oshie was called Coach Oshie by so many people. He was a part of the hockey community. I mean, so many people have seen that picture of him with the cup. And clearly, hockey was the thing that TJ and his dad had together. Like, I feel anybody that's close with your dad, you have a hobby with your dad. Like, you have something you guys do together. And because that thing was hockey, I think it just elevated this moment even higher than it already was.
Yeah. So again, that was a phenomenal feel-good moment. Like I said, that unfortunately was very much overshadowed by the events of everything else. And of course, the lead-in to Wednesday was Monday's game. Tom Wilson, that whole incident, no suspension, the 5K fine, and everything that happened afterwards. The Rangers calling out George Peros, who originally was going to go to the game and eventually bailed on that idea. And of course, as suspected, there was a little bit of violence on Wednesday. Now, Deej, I'll say this. When it comes to fighting, because I think a lot of people, and I was very outspoken on Twitter while all this was happening, I think a lot of people somehow have got it confused that despite being a Bruins fan and growing up on the product that I grew up on, that I'm somehow anti-fighting, anti-physicality, and that I'm just a pansy who should go watch other sports if you don't like it. It's just all that nonsense, whatever. Obviously, I've proved it this season, I'm a pretty big fan of fighting. If you didn't see my reaction to Kevin Miller's amazing right hand on Tage Thompson, that just proves to me that you were looking for a reason to be outraged, saw my statement and said, well, there you go, you're just being outraged, and you don't even care to know my opinions, and you just take whatever that was and see it against your narrative, take it at face value, and rabble. I'm still very much a fan of fighting. Would I be against it being taken out of the NHL? Not necessarily. Still very much a fan of physicality. Would I like to see some rule adjustments to prevent brain trauma? Yes, I would. But when it comes to what happened on Wednesday, Deej, there were 3 fights on the opening draw, 6 fights within the first 6 minutes of the game. We talked about it. This is what the NHL wanted. You didn't suspend Tom Wilson. You knew this was going to be the outcome. The NHL got what they wanted. I am very much of the opinion they didn't suspend Tom Wilson for the sake of pulling a rating on Wednesday, and I'm sure Wednesday night's game was one of the most viewed games of the year, if not the most viewed game. I haven't looked up the numbers to that, but I'm more than certain of it. It's what the NHL wanted because they knew it would get attention. The problem for me, of course, is that I view it as negative attention. Again,
Agreed.
As a Bruins fan, growing up with the reputation of what the Bruins are, and trust me, make no mistake, I know what the Bruins were 10 years ago when they won the Cup, and a lot of the tactics and the antics that they used to get there. I'm well aware of it. Trust me. But scripted fighting, and that's what it was on Wednesday. Scripted fighting. You know it's coming. It's not a heat of the moment type of thing. It's the same thing it was a decade ago when Zenon Konopka would line up against Derek Bogard, and they're just like, well, shit, we have to. And I mentioned 2 names there that are a big part of the reason as to why I am vehemently against the idea of scripted fighting. It is that type
well said.
of crap that led, or at least contributed in a big way, to the death of Derek Bogard, to the death of Wade Belak and Rick Rippon. Zenon Konopka, I saw a feature on him within the past year where he talks about how, for the most part, his day-to-day life is hell at this stage. Oh, well, he knew the risks. He elected to play hockey. If he didn't want to take the risk, that's the only way he could get to the NHL. Then blah, blah, blah. You got to protect players. Zenon Konopka still could have had a decent NHL career without having to have a staged fight multiple times a season. Same for Derek Bogard. There's a reason why we are trying to move past that. So again, a heat of the moment scrum, a heat of the moment fight, sure. If someone went after Tom Wilson in the aftermath of that, like what Ryan Strome did, what Panarin did getting in his face, I still think Tom Wilson crossed the line, but I'm not saying the idea of that type of physicality was necessarily wrong, given what hockey is. But the idea of, well, the code. In this next game, everyone knows we're going to sit here and beat the crap out of each other, and let's go out there and do it and fight for the sake of fighting. That I disagree with, because I'm sorry, there has been way too much damage done. So many names that I haven't mentioned that I could, and that's the problem. There is a laundry list of names. And for me, not only as a hockey fan, but as a wrestling fan, I think back to how times have changed. You know, as a wrestling fan, I grew up, and boy, what was the big problem with professional wrestling? Crap load of drug abuse. So there was that time between like 2006 and 2012 where wrestlers are dropping like flies, even dating back to like 97. Vice just aired a 2-part, hour-long each documentary on Brian Pillman and the effects that drug abuse had on his life. That again, that's the big part of the reason as to why I have this opinion, because you grow up and it's like, okay, you watch these fighters in the NHL, and for those that are still around, you see what their quality of life is now. And again, yes, it was their decision, but you could have done more to not have the situation be as bad as it is. Same when it comes to wrestling. You could have done more. Some people still would have died, but not as many. I'm sorry. I very much associate all of those thoughts and those opinions with scripted fighting. I didn't watch Wednesday's game. I followed along on the timeline because people were tagging me and stuff every 5 seconds because that's how often there was a fight. It's just I can't support crap like that. I don't find it entertaining. Maybe someone like Mark Mathot does. Oh, this is the first Caps game I've watched this year. Good for you, Mark. Nobody cares. Deej, your thoughts at this point, so I don't ramble on too much before we get into the rest of what happened in that game.
Well, you bring up Zenon Konopka, and I do want to mention that, and him saying his life is hell on a daily basis. And I can't stress this enough. I know if you're younger, like if you're still in your 20s, this is probably the gravity of this probably doesn't hit you. But the day after you turn 24, your brain doesn't change. I'm 32 years old. I feel the exact same way I did when I was 24. I'm not like a wise old wizard or anything like that. Zenon Konopka retired from hockey at 33. He was just 1 year older than I am. And that for me, like, I know like you can sit there and say, well, it's only like 20, 30 people, but I understand fighting's place in hockey. I've cheered at fights before. I'm not going to say ban it tomorrow. I don't think it'll still be in the league in 10 years, but when you ask a question like, is keeping fighting in hockey worth ruining lives? And I don't think it is. And it's a difficult statement to make, but I think understandable.
I mean, there are some people who have the opinion of, well, the sport's the sport, the risks, it is what it is. But that also doesn't mean that you don't try to make it safer. That's like saying for a Formula One driver, well, the risks. No, you still try to make it as safe as you can while keeping the spirit of the sport what it is. You look, and for anyone who follows Formula One, like you guys will know this with Romain Grosjean and the crash he had in Bahrain last year. And for those who don't know, do you remember the clip of a Formula One car bursting into a fireball within the past year? That was the Romain Grosjean crash, where in the past couple of years, they installed what's known as the halo, which is literally just like that Y-shaped part of the car that protects the drivers. Before that wasn't there. It was just an open cockpit. If you had that open cockpit, that man could have been decapitated instantly. Gone. So what would you prefer? Do you prefer the evolution of this to try and keep people safe in something that's inherently has, dangers and risks? Or nope, just keep the integrity of the sport. People know the risks. I know I'm personally on the side of try to keep the integrity and the spirit of the sport as much as you can while still making it safer. So I digress. don't want to rant and ramble too long, but again, that is why I was very much against the idea of 6 scripted fights. Scripted not meaning like, WWE scripted. They weren't really hurting. Scripted as in everyone knew they were going to happen. Not a fan of that whatsoever because it's brain damage for the sake of brain damage and the code. That said, one of those fights did involve Tom Wilson, who was jumped by Brendan Smith. Later on, he did not return to the game, which, especially today, he said in the press conference that he is fine and he's going to play tonight. The Capitals play Philadelphia tonight. So very much appears as though Tom Wilson was pulled out of the game for the sake of trying to calm things down after it was well too late. So good on you there for that one. Let the damage be done and then be like, sure. It's like saying like, boy, this, man, my hand hurts. Boy, I can't move my hand. Up. Okay, it feels like it's about to fall off. I should probably go to the doctor tomorrow. It falls off. Well, I could have done that sooner. Again, another Tougie analogy for you, but just too little too late on that one. But of course, the big moment, Deej, from there, and I'll mention this as well. This was the first game in 5 years, almost, to feature over 140 penalty minutes combined. The last game to do it was the Canucks Leafs on November 5th, 2016. They had 171. If I'm not mistaken, that was, I don't remember if David Clarkson was involved in that. I remember that was a really hyped up, touted game where those two fan bases and those two teams in general were pretty well determined to kill one another, and they tried. But the big moment here, of course, was Pavel Buchnevich cross-checking Anthony Mantha in the face. Now, the build-up to the play, Buchnevich goes to hit someone along the half wall. Mantha comes in. As Buchnevich skates away, Mantha takes a couple of swipes at him. They circle away. They circle back towards each other. And as they get close, Buchnevich, as I would say, defended himself and hit Mantha in the face. Now, why would I say defend myself? Or defend himself? Because the NHL set the standard for what that game was going to be based off of the last game and what that game was. If you are Pavel Buchnevich, if you are Anthony Mantha, and you two are skating towards each other, and there have already been 6 or more fights, do you not think that's what's about to happen? And in a fight, Deej, let me know if you're wrong, but do you often sit there and wait for the other guy to strike first? Or if you think you're about to be in a fight, do you try to end it before it starts? I am not saying under normal circumstances that I don't believe that's not penalty worthy or suspension worthy. But given the circumstances of the game, what else did you expect?
And this is a weird situation, too, because I only saw the first period of this game because I was playing hockey at this point. And I feel, and this is very rare, I think at this point, this whole situation of everything was so out of hand that I don't think there's a right answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd call that fair. I mean, like I said, the standard they set for the game, for what?
It was chaos.
Yeah,
the standard was chaos.
It's what
the game
they wanted.
was chaos.
It was the good old-fashioned hockey we all know and love. It's a man's game. Like, that's what it was. At the end of the day, like, I don't really have another opinion on that other than like, yes, under those normal circumstances, very much so is that a penalty and suspension worthy. And again, Buchnevich does end up getting suspended for 1 game. In the meantime, around the league, Shane Gostisbehere was suspended for 2 for boarding Mark Friedman, which, compare incidents if you want, but there's inconsistency there. Speaking of inconsistencies, Nick Hague hit Kirill Kaprizov from behind. As far as I know, nothing. Sidney Crosby slammed Travis Konechny to the ice. Nothing. The inconsistencies, the lack of action, it's what got us here in the first place. And again, we very much went over that on the show earlier this week. But yeah, at the end of the day, did Buchnevich deserve to be suspended? Yes. But the fact that they only suspended him for 1 game says to me well, the circumstances of the game, was it really that bad of an action? Like, they're sending literally all the wrong messages. And I talked about that in the last podcast. Your idea was, oh, we sell our product now on the speed and the skill and the youth of the sport. No, you don't. No, you don't. At least in this instance, you still very much appealed to the good old hockey game and the man's sport and the rough and tough garbage that at the same time you've said that you've been trying to move past. Again, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I still enjoy a good hockey fight. I grew up watching that stuff. I mean, goddamn. You know how many times I've watched the PJ Stock, Steve and Pete fight? Like, for the love of God. Like, people know, like, if I'm on stream, there have been occasions where it's like I've gone on hockey fights and we've just sat there and watched hockey fights. Like, I'm not against the idea of it, but the NHL promoted violence. It got violence. And Buchnevich got a 1-game suspension for a circumstance that would at least net him 3 or more in normal circumstances. So why didn't they do it, especially when the Rangers had 2 games left at that point, one last night against the Bruins, which they got killed because of course they did. How would you have any emotion or energy left in the tank after that? And then they have their final game of the season coming up here in short order against the Bruins on Saturday to conclude that season. So I don't know what else to say, really, Deej, in relation to that. The NHL got what they wanted.
Yeah. And I would say, just for the sake of brevity, before we move on to the off-ice fallout of some of this stuff, this situation has been handled so poorly at so many different levels that I suddenly, in the middle of viewing what's been going on the last few days, I feel weird about having had such a strong opinion originally on this, now that there's been so many different developments. And I guess, like, the real foundation of my initial, like, oh, here's why I don't think it should have suspension, was trust in George Peros. And then he hits all these. And then, so the Shane Gostisbehere suspension comes down. So I think, oh, he's like a referee. He's trying to take control of a game. And then the inconsistency comes right back. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what's going on. Everything blew up and got so hairy so quick. And I don't know. I mean, like, I know a lot of people disagree with me and my opinions from last time. And if there's one thing that people should know about me, is, like, as long as we're not talking mathematics or code, I'm pretty easy to convince of things otherwise. Like, I like to keep an open mind. And so seeing how this fell out, I think maybe George Peros made the wrong call, not necessarily based on just the video he watched, but I think there was a ridiculous lack of foresight when it came to the public fallout of this, regardless of what they did. And I think that's the real issue, was the lack of foresight in how this was going to go over with the public.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, right, there would have been fights on Wednesday regardless.
Yeah.
But if Tom Wilson's not in that game, it wouldn't have been to the extent. For the most part, I do think it would have been very similar to, at least in the short term, maybe a game next season would have been different. But at least in the short term, it would have been, like I said, the Wayne Simmons, Alex Edler situation, where it's like, all right, we got to do this, the code, but then it's done. And throughout the course of that game, it was never done. It just kept going. So,
yeah.
But as Deej mentioned, there was off-ice fallout as well. And for a while, very much conspiratorial on my part, but due to the lack of NHL action, it certainly looked one way, and it still looks a little bit fishy. The New York Rangers, in the aftermath of this game, fired John Davidson and Jeff Gordon, which near unthinkable, I would say, to fire your team president and GM in the aftermath of this. Now, quote unquote, there were a couple of different stories in relation to this, and that is that Davidson and Gordon apparently hurried to distance themselves from the team statement, telling other executives that they didn't know this was going to be said and that they didn't stand by it, and that was cause for release. But then also, there was word, and this was from Darren Dreger, that it was coincidental and not related to the statement. And another source says ownership felt that the Rangers underachieved this season. So even now, we're getting conflicting stories because there was someone else who spoke to a source saying that the source close to the Rangers that isn't buying the performance-based thing, specifically why turf John Davidson, who just got with the team in 2019. There is a bunch of shadiness going on with the New York Rangers right now, Deej.
My only statement on this and this whole situation is, if you were firing them based on the Rangers' performance this season, why did you do it then? And why did you think you needed to install a new president and GM for the final 2 games of the season?
Immediately naming the successor.
Why don't you wait? If it's performance based, you wait till the season's over.
Yes.
I heard very briefly on NHL Network today that a lot of other teams, they wanted to voice their support for Peros, but you just can't. They didn't want to come out and say anything because, the court of public opinion is too strong.
On the flip side of that, you do have someone like Rod Brindamore who alluded towards being glad that other people spoke up against the Department of Player Safety because he feels like it just wouldn't be worth the trouble and wouldn't be worth the fine. Yeah. So you've definitely seen this divide within the NHL on this opinion. And I think to, further what you were saying about the timing of this is the most suspect thing. I mean, I agree. To me, this initially looked like the NHL saying, well, hey, you made this mess, get yourselves out of it, change the narrative. It could still be that, although in the aftermath of this, the following day, that being on Thursday, the Rangers were officially fined $250K for their public statement, with the NHL saying this: public comments of the nature issued by the Rangers that were personal in nature and demeaning of the league executive will not be tolerated, said Gary Bettman. While we don't expect our clubs to agree with every decision rendered by the DOPS, the extent to which the Rangers expressed their disagreement was unacceptable. It's terribly unfair to question George Peros' professionalism and dedication to his role and the Department of Player Safety. So with that, admittedly, my idea of, man, this just screams like the NHL is trying to create a diversion, goes away a little bit, but also in a way it doesn't, because there is still so much shady stuff going on here. Again, the idea that John Davidson just gets there within the past less than 2 years. Jeff Gorton's been there for a while, and he has been the catalyst towards building the Rangers teams that you've seen now, basically since 2006, 2007. Like, he was with the Bruins. The Bruins decided, we're going to go this way. So he ended up leaving for the Rangers, and what ended up being a pretty good decision for him, all things considered. Again, I don't downplay the idea that James Dolan, the owner of the team, isn't this egotistical asshole. I don't, because I think any NBA fan can see what he's done with the New York Knicks over the years and say, nope, that's very much in James Dolan's character. The big part, I'd say, to the Rangers' success, because as it is, we're just seeing the New York Knicks finally put something together this season. A big part to the Rangers' success is that, unlike with the Knicks, James Dolan hasn't meddled. He has meddled with the Knicks in the past, and that's led to issues. For the most part, he's been pretty hands-off with the Rangers, and it's worked out quite well for him. So I don't put it past him that he could have finally spoken up here. But it still doesn't feel like we have the full story, and I think that's the point. The idea that they underachieved this year is hilarious. It is, because the narrative for the Rangers heading into this season, from any reasonable person, well, Tougie, James Dolan isn't reasonable. Sure. But the narrative for the Rangers was, if they could make the playoffs, that'd be good, but they're in a very close division, and the future is still incredibly bright. That was the narrative. So now, all of a sudden, the day after this Tom Wilson incident, the narrative is now, well, you guys underperformed, you're not going to make the playoffs. And we're going, like Deej said, we're going to make this change now. Not 3 games from now, but right now. It's incredibly fishy. And it's really the only way to sum up the situation. It is incredibly fishy. And I suppose the best way to sum it up here, Deej, first and foremost, it feels like a mistake. Because I do think what that leadership group was building was certainly on the right track. I've done nothing pretty much but praise the Rangers this year and for what it's going to be in the future. We have said so many times the Rangers are going to win a cup within the next 10 years. That might be in doubt now, to be honest. Depending the trajectory they were on prior to this week, I genuinely thought with all my heart they could win a cup within the next 10 years. The steps they take in the next few months could destroy that. This is a very crucial time now for the history of the New York Rangers moving forward throughout this next decade, because I genuinely think this amount of turmoil could throw them off of what I thought was a very promising path, Deej.
Yeah, I agree. I find the lack of transparency to be the issue here, because anyone that was initially on the Rangers side, they see what was going on with the Department of Player Health or the Department of Player Safety, and there's a clear lack of transparency there. So the Rangers respond with a lack of transparency, and then they give us the last thing anybody wants in a world where there is a lack of transparency, which is a line of corporate bullshit where it's just coincidental. So I don't know. It's unfortunate everywhere. This whole situation got so far out of hand that or was it just a slow news week? It's hard to say.
It's the timing of everything certainly sets you up to not know and to feel like you don't have the full story here. And maybe that's what they were looking for. But you talk about the shadiness surrounding some aspects of the NHL. This did not help. I'll leave it at that. This did not help whatsoever. And as you mentioned, of course, already they installed their new president and GM, that being Chris Drury, who was known for a long time to be the next guy. Like, that's not a surprise that Chris Drury is their guy and that he's the one taking over. Again, I'm not, in terms of my questioning what happens now, I'm not second guessing what Chris Drury is going to be able to do as a president and as a GM. But essentially, are you a puppet here? Like, is this what people thought for the longest time? Like, is this now a Eugene Melnyk, Pierre Dorion situation like we've had in Ottawa? Or is James Dolan not going to be involved? Like, there's so much shadiness surrounding this that, yeah, it's tough to say, hey, what do we believe here? But in terms of what Chris Drury, what he's going to be looking like moving forward, we'll see how it plays out. That said as well, the reason why there is concern in terms of what this team's going to do moving forward is you have someone like Mark Messier commenting on the way the Rangers are currently built, saying, in my opinion, if you're going to win, you got to be able to win in the street and in the alley. I particularly would not have built the team that didn't answer or have answers in that regard. So, number one, Mark Messier is an old man. Full stop. That comment from him isn't surprising at all. You can question the Rangers' toughness if you want to, but here's the problem. And here's why I'm worried about the Rangers, because if you have Pierre Dorion listen to someone like Mark Messier, I think it's going to be bad for the Rangers. And if I think I said Pierre Dorion instead of James Dolan, excuse me. But if James Dolan trusts Mark Messier, if James Dolan truly believes that this team wasn't on the right trajectory, they're in big trouble. Because again, the Rangers were on the right directory, and here's why. Over the past couple of years, ever since they put out that statement of, hey, we need to retool, they've been retooling. And what do you get first, Deej, when you're in a retool? You get your stars, and you let them develop.
Yeah.
And that's what the Rangers have been doing. They have accumulated their star players who are still young, but they have accumulated those stars. Filling in with the grit is secondary. Did Tampa already have Kucherov, Stamkos, Point, Cirelli, or did they start off with Goodrow, Coleman, and guys like that, Cedric Paquette? You focus on this first, and then you fill in. The Toronto Maple Leafs, Matthews, Marner, Nylander. Then what do? Then you get Wayne Simmons. Then you get Jake Muzzin. Those type of players that Messier is talking about, the insulation for the Stars, you're not at that stage where if you had that insulation, this team wins a cup. You're not there yet. So Mark Messier certainly is looking at this team as being further along than they actually are. A lot of Rangers fans were too, and maybe James Dolan was too. But if I'm a Rangers fan, I am very much concerned over the future of this team, depending on what direction they go, because I genuinely believe the leadership group that was just let go was on the right path. And if Chris Drury doesn't agree with that path and sides more with the Dolans and with the Messiers, there is a chance you could screw this up by trying to essentially shortcut your way to a further along step. And sometimes that works, but a lot of the times, Deej, those teams that try to take those shortcuts to get to the end goal, you crash and burn and you don't make it. So I don't know what else there is to say about the New York Rangers right now.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. You've got your young stars, let them develop, and then find what I will call playoff support is a good way to describe those type of players. I don't know, Mark Messier got to GM a team from the locker room in Vancouver. We all know how that went. So there's a reason he's not a GM right now.
Fair enough. Now, for the Washington Capitals, of course, because obviously with the Rangers, again, one game left this season. There's not that much else to talk about right now. For the Capitals, obviously, moving towards the playoffs. Tom Wilson, again, I mentioned that scrum that he took a part in. He said this, nothing I say right now is going to change anyone's opinion. He considered the other night to be a routine scrum by hockey standards, didn't think the situation would blow up after he was fined. To me, obviously, that reads as, hey, Tom Wilson views what he did as not being a problem, which, again, I disagree with. I still think he went over the line with the punch. The NHL agreed that he went over the line, but I don't think they viewed it as big of an issue as myself and a lot of other people did. Again, the Caps play Philadelphia tonight. And, I mean, for Tom Wilson, he might very well get his wish in terms of that style of hockey being the prominent feature, because if the season were to end today, Deej, Washington would play Boston. And, if Mark Messier wants to see
Boston
a team
plays in the playoffs.
If Mark Messier wants to see a team that's not willing to put up with Tom Wilson's shit, I'm not saying Washington wouldn't win that series or that they're not a better team. These are two very good hockey teams. But if you want that style of play, the Bruins are very much built for that style of play. I'm not sitting here saying as a Bruins fan that I hope to see Marchand slewfoot somebody or Kevin Miller deliver what is probably the most devastating right hand in all of hockey, or for Trent Frederick to be out there doing what Trent Frederick does. But, that idea that was mentioned by John Scott of it's open season. You get Washington and Boston in the playoffs. Even Pittsburgh, there are some tough bastards on Pittsburgh, the Islanders as well. But especially if you end up with Washington versus Boston, the potential is there. It could end up just being a normal series, but the potential is there for a lot of shady stuff and a lot of potential injuries with how playing along the edge certain members of those two teams can be.
Yeah, I agree. I do something that came across on NHL radio on Sirius XM today that I do want to point out, just because for whatever reason, I haven't seen it reported anywhere except for on the radio real quick. Apparently, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if most people are aware of this, but it is a thing. Artemi Panarin can barely speak English. Like a lot of guys that are shy, I guess they don't, it takes them a while. They don't learn English. Understandable. But apparently right after this scrum, or after this incident, with Alex Ovechkin's help, Tom Wilson reached out to Panarin to apologize. Never heard anything back. But, I mean, I don't necessarily think that you apologize for something if you think it's a non-issue. And so now I think Tom Wilson has accepted there's nothing he can do and is fully embracing the heel turn. you can even call it a turn.
Yeah, fair enough. So with that, I think we've pretty much covered everything there is to cover on this particular subject at this stage.
Agreed.
There are some other things we can talk about here before getting through our kind of division overlook as we do. So with that, Deej, what do you say we talk about the Under-18 World Junior Tournament here a little bit as it concluded last night? I know before you mentioned you hadn't really checked out too much of it. I presume that's still the same?
Yeah. They're, I don't know. I don't think I've seen a clip of this. Like, I'm aware of what's going on just by reading headlines and seeing stuff pop up on Reddit here and there. Mm-hmm. But I never sat down and watched a full game of these U18s. That said, seeing the results of these and seeing 3 names pop out, I feel like I should have.
Yes. So, for those that missed it, Canada wins their first gold medal in this particular tournament since 2013, beating Russia 5-3 in the final. Very much led, and really in general, this tournament was very much highlighted by 3 players, in particular, of course, Shane Wright, who we mentioned before, but then the other 2 that are gaining even more attention because they were a year younger, Connor Bedard and Matvei Michkov. Michkov was voted MVP by the media. And looking here, Michkov, an underager leading this tournament in scoring. He averaged over 2 goals per game. Shane Wright led the tourney in points. For example, Michkov here, 2.17 points per game, not for goals. And Shane Wright had 2 3/4 points per game, so 2.75 points per game. Connor Bedard, a double underager, as it was worded here, led Team Canada in scoring and was 3rd in scoring in the tournament, averaged 2 points a game. All these guys averaged 2 points a game as underagers. And again, dominating a tournament here for Bedard and Michkov as well. For kids that are meant to be 2 years older than them, it's ridiculous. And again, we talked about the idea of Michkov and Bedard. Are we looking at the hype is out there already of like, oh, the next Crosby, Ovechkin. That hype is being more and more deserved after performances like this. And Connor Bedard tied Connor McDavid for most points by an under-16 player in the under-18 World Juniors ever. 14 points in 7 games. Connor Bedard, in terms of performance at this tournament, literally on the same level as Connor McDavid. First and foremost, for Team Canada, this is wonderful news with Shane Wright and Connor Bedard moving forward. For the Russians with Michkov, again, you talk about what this kid could be as well. And you could very well be looking at a Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel situation when those 2 were in the same draft, where it's like, okay, if it was any other year, they'd both be number 1 picks. Someone's probably going to be picked second there. Probably be Michkov because of the Russian factor. In terms of the hype at this level now, and for those who are saying, do we view Connor Bedard at the same level of Connor McDavid? The answer is yes at this stage. If someone wants to be all aboard this hype train, you absolutely go for it. Those stat lines are staggering.
Yeah. The kid has the goods. He's learning how to be better than everybody else at a significantly younger age than people learn how to be better than everybody else. And that is an experience that very few people get to have, and almost all those people that experience that end up becoming NHL superstars.
Yeah, that's fair. So, like I said, at this stage, you definitely view this as, the hype train is in full force now. And again, Connor Bedard is still, as is Michkov, a ways away from making it, even to his draft year. How much better is he going to be if he's already this good? Obviously, as, you continue to develop as a player and continue to essentially grow into a man. Again, we're talking about what, a 15, a 16-year-old? 16-year-old. There are going to be changes made, and obviously the level of competition and everything. It's obviously worth keeping an eye on, and you will continue to hear about these players in particular moving forward because, my God, as if the hype level wasn't as outrageous enough before this tournament. It's, again, like the hype is through the roof now at this stage. Along with that, wanted to quickly mention this because we had this conversation on the podcast a couple weeks ago when it was announced, of course, that the NHL was not only, of course, signing up with ESPN, but with Turner as well in the aftermath of leaving NBC. And we now have some word, Deej, on who could potentially be involved in a personality standpoint. And we talked about the idea of who would be up there if they were, and the word was that they wanted like the NBA style panel with Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley. And we talked about the personalities that would be there. And obviously the overwhelming favorites within the hockey community, very much Paul Bissonnette and Ryan Whitney. But right now it looks like that Turner, at least, is going to be going with Kenny Albert and Eddie Olczyk. So both of these guys who are associated with the NBC broadcast, that looks like they'll be brought on moving forward here with Turner. And Olczyk has apparently agreed to a 5-year deal to become the lead analyst next season. He'll still have freedom to cover horse racing on NBC. Ray Ferraro is apparently in line as well, affiliated with the NBC broadcast. He is in line to become ESPN's lead analyst here as well. So, Deej, I guess the question to you, is it interesting enough? Like, the decision behind this, I can't say I necessarily disagree with the logic of bringing back the familiar faces. But also on the flip side, then the argument is, why not essentially make your own stamp and present something entirely new for a new era? Where do you stand with this? And I guess your idea on the three that are being mentioned to be sticking around with NHL coverage in the States?
I think that Disney, the parent company of ESPN, and then obviously with the Turner Broadcasting being involved, I think knowing how those companies run, the last thing they would want is for the transition to be jarring. And so it makes sense for the first few years, at least, to stick with the familiar faces, the guys that people like, the guys that can perform and do great on-air work, that know how to do on-air work, that understand the rhythm, that have worked for a professional network. And then you kind of slowly acquire and bring in members of the team that you might not have thought of, seeing how they fit into an already existing system that you're essentially building from scratch.
Yeah, that's fair. And you know what? I do agree with that sentiment of, you do want that transition to be as smooth as it possibly can be. So I definitely agree with that. But as well, there's another name that's being thrown around on the ESPN side that is a little bit polarizing. ESPN is apparently talking to Wayne Gretzky for the sake of a broadcasting role as a push to sign on-air talents intensifies. I don't know if Wayne Gretzky's the guy. I get the idea of it, right? Wayne Gretzky, the greatest of all time, giving his opinion on the games as they play out. The logic behind that is sound. But Wayne Gretzky, even, dating back, obviously, to the era that he played where players weren't the most talkative, they still aren't because of hockey culture, Wayne Gretzky was never the most outspoken guy in the world anyway. And obviously, it's a little bit different from the time where the Coyotes were like, hey, be our coach, and that didn't work out. I won't blame that solely on Wayne, of course. But, you look at, I guess, the on-air talents you could bring on. Is Wayne Gretzky that guy? I don't know. I'd be intrigued, but I think the fear from a lot of people is that, this could be pretty bad and kind of sputter out rather quickly.
The guy's stiff as a board. I don't know if you've seen his commercials or any interviews. There's nothing exciting about hearing Wayne Gretzky talk other than that he's Wayne Gretzky and he's talking. I would go as far as to say that Sidney Crosby might be a better choice.
Apparently he has wonderful bread commercials in Canada.
Well, as somebody that's never eaten Canadian bread, I I don't know.
Was it bread or milk? I'm pretty sure he's been involved in
It might be
commercials for
both. Maybe he's really getting in there. Did he do cheese too?
Sidney Crosby, the face of the essentials.
Oh my goodness.
And the last point here, before we get into our division breakdown as well, for something I just wanted to quickly touch up upon because we had alluded towards it in the last episode with the news that was coming out. But officially some changes in the AHL as the at least the ownership or the affiliation with the Canucks and the Utica Comets is over. They are technically going to have the word relocation was used. I'm not sure who's moving, who's not, but the Canucks next year will have an AHL team in Abbotsford. So here's hoping the Abbotsford Heat come back. That won't happen because the Stockton Heat are there. But so Abbotsford, obviously much easier to have a team in BC instead of having to rely on a team in goddamn New York. We knew this was coming. Again, talked about the history of, especially the California expansion with the AHL. So this isn't surprising. And as expected, the New Jersey Devils are now going to be affiliated with the Utica Comets. They're actually going to keep the Comets name. It's a 10-year deal with Utica and New Jersey, which again makes a lot more sense. New Jersey and New York. So there you go. Not that New Jersey had a weird affiliation before. So we'll see what happens here in terms of what team is left behind. My presumption when it comes to the AHL, and of course, who the Devils were with at this stage, I guess the presumption at this stage would be that you are, unless it's a full-on expansion team or unless somebody else moves, that the Binghamton Devils, Binghamton might be SOL here in terms of having a team, but we'll see how it happens. And wanted to shout out the Bridgeport Sound Tigers as well, Deej, who are apparently going to rename themselves to the Bridgeport Islanders, because when you think about Bridgeport, Connecticut, you think about the islands. The AHL, man, sometimes. Yeah. Team relocations, but then the idea, too, of just, let's just name ourselves after the NHL team. Like, sometimes it makes more sense to be a little bit more unique. So, I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to pay too much attention to the AHL anymore ever since they stole my team away. Just for those of you playing bingo
or at least
at home.
Choose one of the other senses. Like, they could have been the Bridgeport Taste Tigers. Or the Bridgeport Sight Tigers.
Moving on.
So many great options.
So many great options. Not just in the AHL, but for you at Manscaped. No. Or maybe. Deej, with that, shall we move on to our lovely division breakdown here to kind of wind down the show, because there is surprisingly a lot to talk about when we haven't been able to go through it kind of team by team over the past week.
Yeah. So we should let's start with the Central Division. They have the most points. So I guess we start with Carolina news. There isn't a lot.
No, there really isn't. The big thing over the past week that just could have been mentioned is Alex Nedeljkovic, who, again, the story for him goes... The story for him goes, of course, that he was on waivers. And then this season, in order for him to remain an RFA and not be a UFA, he needed enough playing time. And by hook or by crook, they got him there. So Alex Nedeljkovic, again, goes from being on waivers to potentially being the guy now heading into the playoffs, and gets RFA status back as well. So that's huge for the Hurricanes. And Nedeljkovic had a great play within the past week, set up Dougie Hamilton for an overtime winner. The Hurricanes are a very interesting team heading into the playoffs, but so it's everybody else, essentially, and especially those in their own division. They don't have a regulation loss in their past 10 games. It's been a great surge for them, pun intended, I suppose, to get to the top of the Central. And Deej, barring a miracle, they are going to win the Central Division. They're on 80 points through 54 games. The Lightning on 75 in 53. Panthers also on 75 and 54. So at the time, Deej, it looks like we have the answer. It's probably going to be the Battle of Florida in round 1 between the Lightning and the Panthers. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So Carolina's 2 remaining games are both against Nashville. So I think they're in. But what's interesting here is Florida's 2 remaining games are against Tampa. Carolina's 2 remaining games are against Nashville. So we're theoretically seeing 9-game playoff series where the first 2 games don't count in both incidences, and I think that's fascinating.
That's a fair point.
So Tampa, they have now said that Kucherov and Stamkos are ready to go for the playoffs. We'll see how God punishes them.
Oh man, I mean, regardless, I guess when you look at the series here with Florida, of course, I wanted to mention, and I'm not sure if the streak has been snapped. Each, let me know. But a point I had for last week's or for earlier in the week's episode that we couldn't talk about is that Spencer Knight became the youngest goalie in NHL history to win 4 games in a row to start his career, and Sam Bennett at this stage, at least when I had this stat, he had 12 points in 38 games in Calgary, where he had posted 13 points in 9 games with Florida. So outscored his Calgary pace, 38 games in Calgary, 9 games in Florida. So, I mean, the Panthers are looking good, obviously. I mean, you have 3 guys who could realistically start playoff games for you if needed. The Sam Bennett acquisition has been a phenomenal pickup. But then obviously you go up against Tampa, where there are some health concerns, for sure. But at the end of the day, too, obviously the Panthers are going to be underdogs in the series going up against the defending champions. Andrei Vasilevsky, Hedman, of course, Kucherov, and Stamkos should both be healthy. So we'll get into, obviously, a full playoff preview when it's 100% official. But, yeah, it looks like we're going to get that Battle of Florida.
Yeah, so those stats you mentioned are all still accurate. Due to the COVID rescheduling because of Dallas early in the season, the Panthers haven't played a game since Monday, and they don't play again until tomorrow night. So the Panthers are now fully healthy, minus Aaron Ekblad. Very scary to think what this team looks like when Aaron Ekblad and Sam Bennett can share the ice at the same time. That has not happened yet. So I don't know. This is a team with heart. They're coached by one of the greatest coaches in history. If there is a team that can destroy the almost living incarnation of the Hawks from the Mighty Ducks, it's this Q-coached Florida Panthers team.
So I'm very excited for that series. Obviously excited for
I already have
every
tickets.
Series at this stage.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we talked about them before, but Nashville and Dallas, the Preds right now in that final playoff spot, 4 points ahead of Dallas, Stars with a game at hand. Of course, you talked about the upcoming schedules here as well for these 2 teams. The Preds in their final 2 play Carolina. Carolina, I think, could afford to rest some people if they had to. Dallas plays their second game against Tampa. They lost 6-2 on Wednesday. And then they play Chicago in their final 2 games, wrapping up their season on Monday. So, I mean, again, it looks like Nashville is going to have just enough to get over the finish line. And when talking about Dallas, I mean, obviously they were getting clowned on a little bit earlier in the week for saying that they plan on allowing 100% capacity for the playoffs. It's like, well, you got to make the playoffs first to be able to have that luxury. So we'll see what happens there. How cute that they think they're going to make it. But the problem is, obviously, for Dallas is they're just so beat up. Like, so incredibly beat up. And to the point where Rick Bowness, as the coach, was saying that they're probably not going to have another team skate for the rest of the season. I don't know if that's changed since, but that was the quote over the past week because they're so beat up and tired. And obviously, COVID's been a huge factor on their season as well. And a point that you had here, too, that I'm intrigued by because he has produced on the score sheet, but you got to see him in his first game back. And that was Tyler Seguin being back for the Stars. Your opinion on Seguin from what you got to see. The eye test, Deej, you got to see him with your own eyes. You said something about Seguin that I'm intrigued by.
Yeah, his strides looked labored and short. And this is a guy who just had his hip rebuilt. I think if Dallas is comfortably in or out of a playoff spot, Seguin isn't playing right now. I mean, Seguin has some of the best hands in the league. He has one of the better wrist shots in the league. He's a highly accurate sniper. He's going to get on the score sheet no matter what his legs are doing. That's the type of player Tyler Seguin is. So, I mean, I mean, you think about Robert Griffin III, right? A team rushing back a guy with a terrible leg injury to try and make the playoffs. Obviously, I think medical science has advanced to a point where we're not dealing with such a drastic comparison, and that's probably a bit of a tabloidian hot take, if you will. But you hate to see a highly talented player rushed back, especially if, in what mathematically appears to be the result, the team doesn't make the playoffs. The guy gets hurt for no reason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whether or not we're speculating on potential long-term damage, it's like obviously the risk is there at the very least. So we'll see what happens with Seguin and with Dallas at this point. But yeah, obviously the odds right now very much not in their favor. They're going to need a little bit of help at this stage to get over the line. I'll mention too, there was a stat out there that is slightly different now after they lost to Tampa, but prior to that, they had lost 25% of their regular season games in overtime, which is the highest rate in the history of the league. So we'll see if that maintains. And obviously that's a big part of the reason as to why they're even there, because granted, they have that game at hand, but they are 8 wins behind Nashville, but have 14 overtime losses to Nashville's 2. So the Bettman point very much coming into play at this stage to keep the Dallas Stars alive in the conversation. With that as well, obviously we know now Chicago not going to make the playoffs. Columbus, there's been talks about what's going to happen with Patrik Laine and that he's taking personal blame, taking responsibility for where he's at this stage. But also, of course, we've talked about Columbus ad nauseum at this stage. But John Tortorella at one point in the past week had Laine on the 4th line with Nathan Gerbe and Zach Dalpe. So talk about putting your star in a position to succeed at this rate. So it's rough. But hey, at least they officially signed Yegor Chinakhov. The Wild. The question, Deej, the question. I mean, number one, we have talked about Marc-Andre Fleury. Future Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. Going to have his number retired by 2 different franchises. The question that we were asked, though, will Marc-Andre Fleury catch Waugh or Brodeur? Number one, Marc-Andre Fleury, for those who don't know, was born in 1984. That makes Marc-Andre Fleury 36 years old. He is not going to play long enough to hit Martin Brodeur's number, which, for those who don't know, again, won 691 wins for Brodeur. Fleury would need to win 201 more games. It's not going to happen. But the idea behind could he catch Patrick Waugh, he would need 61 more wins. Is that possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. But at the end of the day, I think the important takeaway from this, rather than answering that question of what's he going to do? Marc-Andre Fleury is one of the best goalies of all time. He's a future Hockey Hall of Famer. And again, is still absolutely a favorite for the Vezina this year. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah. I think he catches Patrick Waugh. When you say he needs 61 wins, that seems like such a huge number, but when he's still performing at this level and he just needs 3 more seasons of 20 wins, that seems significantly more achievable for a goalie of his caliber on a team of this caliber. So he has 24 this year in an abbreviated season where he's only played 34 games. So you got to figure these next few games. He might do most of the work next year. I don't think he catches Brodeur, no, but I definitely think he can get to second all time.
Could happen. Colorado in second in this division as well. Shout out to Nazem Kadri, who snapped a 20-game goalless drought over the past week. But Deej, right now, there's the argument. Vegas have won 8 of their last 10. They are 4 points above Colorado with a game at hand. Colorado could still catch them. In theory, though, Minnesota, 5 points back with 4 games left, probably not going to catch them. But much like we saw in the Central, you don't exactly have a guarantee here. Colorado could end up giving up home ice advantage to Minnesota in round 1 at this race, or at this rate, because it is an incredibly close race between these 3 teams atop this division.
Yeah, I agree. I think Vegas gets number 1. I think that's a done deal. They play the Blues twice. and then the Sharks once, and then they do have one game against Colorado. But I think they're going to be able to clinch in that time period. But you raise an interesting point about Colorado and Minnesota, and we brought this up last time with this very bizarre downward spiral that has occurred over the last 15 games or so with Colorado. I can't wrap my head around it, and I honestly have not watched enough Colorado hockey to be able to say, oh, this is what it looks like on the ice. But at the same time, nothing statistically jumps out at me other than the wins and losses, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously they've had some injury troubles. I think you've had Rantanen just got suspended or not fined for embellishment. Suspensions. What are suspensions? At the end of the day, I mean, I'm very intrigued to see how this plays out. And for the sake of Minnesota, the funny thing is, if they can get past Colorado, and presumably Vegas will beat the 4 seed, Minnesota actually has a decent shot here of making it out of this division. They had a comeback win against Vegas in the past week. And prior to that overtime win for Vegas in Fleury, the Wild had beaten Vegas 5 straight times. They were 5-1-1, I think now 5-1-2 this season. And prior to that last game, they were 11-2-2 all time against Vegas. So there's just something about Minnesota where, even though they were kind of on that down note, that they've just had Vegas's number over the course of Vegas's existence. So, man, as interesting as the Central is with those top 3 teams, the West, only one team makes it out of this. It's going to be a bloodbath, even more so, I guess, than Wednesday's marquee matchup was. This looks like an incredible game to end up being able to see.
Yeah. I can't wait. All these teams are so good that I think the must-see first-round matchups, I mean, I think Florida-Tampa is going to be a must-see first-round matchup, but Colorado-Minnesota is right up there.
Mm-hmm. Very much agreed. With that, then we get into talking about the team at the bottom of this division. Pretty much guaranteed at this stage that the St. Louis Blues are going to make it. We said as much over the past couple of weeks. They are currently 6 points clear of Arizona, 3 games at hand. They had a chance to clear before. Shockingly, I'm surprised on NHL's site it's not confirmed.
Saying they clinched? Yeah, mathematically they've clinched.
Yeah, I think technically it's because of LA, who have 5 games left. So in theory, they could finish on 58 points. So funny enough, Arizona is ahead of LA, but the Kings are technically mathematically alive at this stage, whereas the Coyotes are not. The St. Louis Blues are going to make the playoffs. We've talked about it a ton. Do they have what it takes to get a first-round upset and make something happen? Yes, because we've seen it before. We'll see if that happens to play out. For Arizona, though, there was a talking point here that apparently Rick Tocchet is unlikely to return as their head coach. So, Deej, you talked about this as well. There's a Tocchet pun to be made there. The idea that we might see a lot of coaching changes here because we weren't able to see them over the past year. Arizona looks to be getting involved in that, and who knows what direction they go. I can't help but think with Armstrong at the helm and his attitude, they're going to go with that old curmudgeon-y hockey man. So I'm not expecting to see some like NCAA signing or someone out of the O as an experimental play. I mean, unless they want to save money, I think they go for someone else. And I mean, God, the conversation was out there over, the idea of, certain old man coaches returning from the KHL. One Bob Hartley could happen. But I don't know. We'll see what happens with Arizona. Although I did want to shout out one Michael Bunting, who we haven't been able to do much yet. But Deej, in the month of April, he had 8 goals in 15 games. And the only rookie with more goals that month was Kaprizov with 11. So Coyotes aren't making the playoffs. They're in that perpetual state of, well, if they can get this and this, they'll be okay. They just can't seem to make it into that actual conversation.
Yeah. It's it's a nightmare situation in Arizona. I don't know how you fix it. I don't know where you start. I don't even know how you attract a coach, especially one that's presumably living like a king in southern Russia right now.
With that as well, quickly wanted to mention for LA, while they are mathematically still alive, the big talking point here is that Anze Kopitar did hit 1,000 points. He becomes just one of 8 active players with at least 1,000 points, behind or alongside Thornton, Crosby, Ovechkin, Marlowe, Malkin, Patrick Kane, and Eric Stahl. And he was the only one not drafted in the top 2 out of those players. He was taken 11th, so one of the best picks of all time for the sake of the LA Kings.
Yeah.
And the question was out there, is Anze Kopitar a Hockey Hall of Famer? Deej, I'm intrigued to see what you think there.
He is. 100% Slovenia #1.
Yes. The Slovenia jokes aside, which again, we do love our Slovenian fans, which we apparently have. It's hilarious. Anze Kopitar to me is a Hockey Hall of Famer. You know why? Deej, he's only 33 years old.
1,000 points and 2 cups.
2 cups. 33 years
33?
old.
He looks like he's 50.
Yeah. 2-time Selke winner. 2-time Cup winner. 1,000 points already. He's only 33. He turns 34 in August. Anze Kopitar is a future Hockey Hall of Famer. No doubt in my mind.
Holy cow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Anze Kopitar was one of those guys that's just been around for so long. He was a 2005 draft pick. And
what's it say on his real birth certificate?
But I mean, taken in the same draft as Crosby, as Price, and it's like you still want to view these guys. It's weird because it's like you view these guys as, yeah, they've been around forever. But also, I think for, people in my age group, even your age group, it's like it doesn't, they still, there's part of you that views them as like, okay, these young stars of the league, even though, I mean, again, at this stage, it's crazy to think, but Kopitar is, 33. Crosby also turns 34 in August. It's just life, man. Life. But yeah, Anze Kopitar, for my money, definitely a future Hockey Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And unless you have anything else to add.
Just blew my mind so much I don't even know how to switch subjects. That for such a small fact, I'm completely shook right now. But yeah, let's move on to another team so I can get my thoughts back.
All right. Well, San Jose, you didn't make the playoffs. The end. Not much else to add there. For the Anaheim Ducks, though, as well at the bottom of the division, obviously it's been a brutal season. I do want to mention, though, David Backes is essentially on his farewell tour. And, David Backes, probably not a future Hockey Hall of Famer, obviously. But at the end of the day, a very well-respected player. I could see his number being retired by the Blues. But, yeah, for David Backes, I mean, again, for Anaheim, it kind of sucks, right? Like Backes, Miller. It's just kind of been where these veterans have gone to wind down their careers. But, a lot of respect for one David Backes. We'll move on to the Mass Mutual East Division. And it's been a 3 to 4 team dogfight. Right now, it still very much is for the top spot in this division. Right now, you have the Pittsburgh Penguins that are there. 75 points, but they only have 1 game left. They can finish with a maximum of 77. Whereas the Washington Capitals can finish, I believe here, 3 games left, so they can finish with a maximum of 79. And the Bruins as well can finish with 77. So really, for the most part, we're looking at the idea of more than likely it's Washington, Pittsburgh, Boston in that order in terms of who's likely to take the number 1 seed. For the Penguins here, though, I mean, still 8 wins in their last 10. They've won 2 in a row. The problem for Pittsburgh, though, Deej, heading into this final game of the season, I mean, number one, the merry-go-round of injuries continued. They got Malkin back, but then lost Matheson. But Mike Sullivan said today that both Tristan Jarry and Casey DeSmith are dealing with some injuries. They're day-to-day. They'll be available for the playoffs, but they will not be playing in tomorrow's game. So for the Capitals, for the Bruins, you're thinking, well, decent chance that Pittsburgh stays on that 75-point mark. Until you realize that on Saturday they play Buffalo, and who knows what that'll end up being. So
in the afternoon, no less.
In the afternoon.
I don't know why, but I feel like Buffalo gets eliminated. They get destroyed way worse in the afternoon. Couldn't tell
because
you why.
Jack Eichel hasn't had enough time to get his full preparation done. That's psychopath. And
he ate a
everything
big
does.
lunch.
He did. He didn't get his third nap of the day in there.
It was slow.
That said,
who's playing goalie for them? I don't know their depth enough. Do you know offhand who their goalie is?
For Pittsburgh, let me check out if Cap Friendly has it updated. Because
no way. It's Maxime Lagacé. What?
Max Lagacé. Interesting. Former Vegas Golden Knights and Boston Bruins legend Max Lagacé.
Yeah.
He'll likely start too because Emil Larmy is the other guy behind him. And he has no NHL experience and 15 games worth of North American experience. Actually, he's got 11 games in the ECHL, but that man has not had a good career so far. So
he hasn't played a game in 2.5 years. So
there you go.
That's exciting. Yeah, they named him the starter. Holy cow.
Aside from that with Pittsburgh, though, Deej, do you recall your opinion on Jeff Carter when the Penguins traded for him? Because unless I'm wrong...
I said that... Go ahead. Yeah, please, go ahead. My opinion was that because of Ron Hextall and how he knew Jeff Carter, if you are going to go out and trade for Jeff Carter, it's because you know exactly what you're getting, and that's exactly what you want. It's like having a favorite food, and you go and you pick it out at the store.
Jeff Carter scored 4 goals in a game. It was against Buffalo, but the first 4-goal game of Jeff Carter's career, something Crosby and Malkin have never done, and the first time it's been done by a Penguin since 2013 when Chris Kunitz was able to pull off the feat. In 40 games with the LA Kings, Jeff Carter had 19 points, 8 goals, and 11 assists. In 13 games with the Penguins, he has 10 points, 8 goals, 2 assists. Again, much like Sam Bennett, fitting in incredibly well with his new team. Obviously, the concern is, long-term, he signed through next year too, and what are the effects of that going to be? But for the most part here, this is it's been a match made in heaven so far with Jeff Carter and the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's entirely on Ron Hextall. He understood this roster. He saw what they needed, and he went out and picked a player he knew well that would fit in. Like, that is some brilliant general managing. And I think hats off to Hextall for that. And that 4th goal Jeff Carter scored last night, it's like he wasn't even trying. He was like a high slot backhander, and it went in. The guy's unstoppable right now.
Yeah, so again, things are looking much better for Pittsburgh, I think, than anyone really expected. They also signed one of their more highly touted prospects, even though he's a former 7th rounder, and Valtteri Puistinen, who, if I'm not mistaken, has done very, very well for himself. I'm pretty sure in the NCAA. Definitely a familiar name for a roster editor like myself in NHL 21. With that, we take a look at Washington again. And this was mentioned as well that has gone a little bit under the rug here in the aftermath of the Wilson situation, but this was kind of the conversation heading in to that game. That being that according to Elliot Friedman, Pierre LeBrun, that the Evgeny Kuznetsov Washington Capitals relationship is very quickly deteriorating. At this stage, you have the quote of Washington is running out of patience with Kuznetsov. Both Kuzi and Samsonov look to have gotten into a little bit of trouble. I mean, again, they've had some incidents here recently. Kuznetsov was added to the COVID absences list. And Pierre LeBrun was stated in saying they're a member of the Caps organization that have grown irritated with Kuznetsov and that they may be willing to trade him this offseason. So he's been, a polarizing player in some ways. We'll see what happens here. I mean, that would certainly be a pretty big move if the Caps were to move on from Evgeny Kuznetsov after this season. But, again, you talk about, I guess really, I don't want to say the problems, but even dating back to the beginning of this season, Deej, when it comes to, I'm just going to say the Russians on the Capitals, especially in regards to COVID and some of the things that Ovechkin said this season. It's been, in terms of bizarre seasons across the league, the Capitals have had a bizarre season this year, to say the least. And it might get even more, wacky heading into this offseason.
So I mean, obviously, we know why Kuznetsov and Samsonov were both benched, right? They were a few minutes late for a team meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And if this was almost anybody other than Pierre LeBrun, I would say this is a non-story. Or I guess Elliot Friedman, I believe, reported it too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know enough about this to make a decision. But if the problem is he's partying too much and not taking the game seriously, you got to imagine that's what it is. Just based on what you know about Kuznetsov's history and what's gone on there before. Where can you even send a guy with that reputation?
Off to Buffalo with you.
Winnipeg is probably the only realistic answer.
Send him to Columbus. John Tortorella. Why? Keep John Tortorella around. Have him coach Laine, Kuznetsov, and all the other guys who don't like to play defense, and film it for HBO. And enjoy the profits, because that would be, talk about Wednesday night's game being must-see TV. Now that would be must-see TV.
Just if you're a member of the Caps organization, right? If you're an official on any level in this organization, I think heads are going to roll, because why would you let this leak? Kuznetsov is just a hair below being a superstar player. Fair. And this is going to tank his value. So whoever leaked this better, tidy up the resume. I'm not saying that like this is untrue or anything like that, but I'm saying that the fact that we, like me and you, just like podcasters, are able to talk about this means that there is something horrifically wrong with the chain of information within the Washington Capitals organization.
It's true. So enough talking about Washington, because my God.
Yeah, right.
I'm just tired of saying it.
It's not even a state.
God, it's not. It's really not. Eat pant, Washington.
There's our episode title. It's not even a state.
Quickly talking about the Bruins, of course, playoff bound. Craig Smith got that hat trick within the past week. He was the first Bruin other than Bergeron, Marchand, Pasternak, or Krejci to record a hat trick since December of 2015. DeJ, I don't know if you've looked at the run sheet. Did you see who the player was that recorded said hat trick?
I did. It's former Florida Panthers superstar, because there was nobody on the team back then, Jimmy Hayes, the man that was 1-for-1 for Riley Smith.
Oh my God,
And then we flipped that trade for a fourth, so I don't see a problem here.
It worked out for nobody in the end, except for Vegas, apparently.
Because flip that one for a fourth.
Because things never work out for Vegas. Jesus. But yeah, I mean, all things for the Bruins, I'm feeling pretty confident in what this team can do. Again, within the past week or so, Jake DeBrusk and Charlie Coyle, both, getting, I guess, the monkey off their back in terms of finally being able to score, which is great. And especially, too, finally, for the first time like this year, Andre Kasha is back in practice. That's right. Andre Kasha still exists, everybody. He was finally back in practice. So again, the Bruins could essentially have their own player back as a deadline acquisition. And the ability to have, if Kasha can play up to his ability and can be healthy, having somebody like that it's a huge boost to this team. Like I said, you're essentially getting a deadline move just before the playoffs. So I'm happy about that. They did beat the hell out of the New York Rangers. It was a 15-save shutout for Swayman. It's not fair that the Rangers had to play. Granted, the circumstances, you had no idea. But, man, the fact the Rangers had to play the day after that Caps game was brutal for them. All in all, though, like I said, I'm feeling good about the Bruins right now. And certainly, too, I mean, 7 wins in their last 10. There's no reason to not be that optimistic. But I'll say this for the Islanders. They have clinched a playoff spot. Semyon Varlamov became the first team in 57 years to shut out a team 4 times in a single season when he blanked the Rangers again, which is ridiculous. But the Islanders only have 4 wins in their last 10. Struggle busting a little bit heading into the playoffs. And it's interesting here because, again, like right now, if the stats or the standings were to hold, they'd end up playing Pittsburgh in round 1. And obviously those two teams have an interesting recent history. I'm intrigued to see kind of how it plays out for the Islanders here. moving forward towards this playoff situation where I'm not going to say it's their coldest stretch of the season, but it certainly kind of feels like it, probably because, again, the importance of the time right now being, again, they have just 2 games left in the regular season.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're the Islanders, so it feels like I'm underrating them. They obviously don't have Anders Lee. I mean, we were praising their early deadline pickups. But man, have they been stale. There is something out of step there. I think that's a good way to put it. In a team that functions like a well-oiled defensive machine, something is mechanically wrong with the way this team is playing hockey right now.
I mean, we'll see what happens. Obviously, thankfully for them, the pressure is off in terms of having to perform at an extremely high level. I mean, at least for the regular season, they've clinched a playoff spot. Obviously, too, we've talked about the Rangers plenty and how they're not going to make it at this stage. Philly, we got nothing. New Jersey, I mean, aside from the absurd fact, Deej, that they iced an average or a lineup of forwards that had an average age of 21.8 years old. Because why not? When you have injuries, just let the kids play and see what the hell happens. But again, I still think the future's bright for New Jersey. Shout out to Pavel Zacha. It might be more now, but he has 16 goals, 6 goals in his last 7 games at the time that I saw that stat. So, I mean, maybe that is the argument.
Finally.
Somebody has to score on a bad team, but maybe not. I mean, hey, that's a good thing for New Jersey. You get rid of Travis Zajac, but if Pavel Zacha can step up and be what Zajac once was, that is a huge boost overall to that team moving forward. If he can continue in that role, I'm not sure how optimistic Rangers fans are that he can, but you get the point. So, hey, not too many positives about the Rangers this season,
or about the Devils, pick.
Excuse me.
Yeah, he's a 6th overall pick, so you think he'd perform at some point. Why not today?
And for the Buffalo Sabres as well, two notes, both somewhat positive. Michael Hauser, obviously an interesting story in goal where he stepped in and done relatively okay. Although I think last night against Pittsburgh when they lost 8-4, he might have been in the crease for that. Oh, Mikey, were you in the crease for that? I'm pretty sure he was.
He was.
Yeah. So to any Rangers fans who's like, hey, do you think maybe like he and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in the future? It's like, well, I mean, there's a reason, I guess, why Hauser's been an ECHL goalie for his career, but it's not impossible, I suppose, that could work out long term. But he did allow...
Listen, the last thing they want Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen finding out is that the tears stick to your cheeks when you cry in Buffalo.
And as well, an even more positive note, even though this team has had some interesting lottery luck in the past, Deej, the Buffalo Sabres have officially clinched the number 1 draft lottery odds. They will be the worst team in the NHL this season. So congratulations to the Sabres for winning the Tankathon. We'll see what your reward ends up being. It might even end up being like
second overall.
Third, 4th, or 2nd overall. Seems incredibly likely, knowing how things have gone for this organization. Deej, with that, to wrap up this show, we'll do it. We'll talk about
de Norte.
We'll talk about the Scotia North Division.
The Scotia.
We will start off with the Toronto Maple Leafs, who, I mean, let's be honest, have just continued to do Maple Leafs things. Mitch Marner still looks great. Austin Matthews has 40 goals in 49 games. Deej, I mean, the question of would he hit 50 in a full season isn't even the conversation. Would Austin Matthews have hit 60 goals in a full season?
Yeah. The question is, would he, I mean, I feel like, and this is my concern with a player like Matthews, is the guy can't score on an empty net. And
0 goals on an empty net this season.
Superstar. That's what prevents him from being a superstar. Guy can't hit an empty net.
I get that Leafs fans are tired of hearing from the other Canadian fan bases about, it's Leafs net, but I mean, you don't see them.
He's the best goal scorer in the league.
You see them trying to hide the fact that he hasn't scored on an empty net. Is he clutch? I don't know. He is probably the best goal scorer in the league. Yeah, I think that's No, not even I think. He is. He's the best goal scorer in the league. And boy, don't Leafs fans love to let you know it. But hey, to fans of other Canadian teams, let them have this one. Let them have this one. You should. You should. Edmonton, you have McDavid. Let them have this one. Winnipeg. Okay, maybe you can be upset because you haven't really had anybody like that. Except for Kovalchuk in your past. Montreal, let him have this one. Calgary, you had Jerome McGinley as a superstar, a Hall of Famer. Let him have this one. Ottawa, let him have this one. I mean, you had Alfie. Yeah, you know, let him have it. And then Vancouver, Mark Messier was once on your team, so let him have this one. Good for Toronto. They finally got one. And shout out to Alex Galchenyuk, who scored in 15 seconds against the Habs because karma is the fucking best. I died laughing when I saw that Galchenyuk scored 15 seconds in. Absolutely died laughing.
Good for Galchenyuk. Get that revenge.
So for Toronto, again, 6 wins in their last 10. They're fine. Securely atop the division. It's not official mathematically, but it's pretty much official. DeJ, Edmonton's clinched the playoff spot, of course. They've pretty much clinched the second seed in that division, having won 7 of their last 10. How many stats do you want me to rattle off about Connor McDavid? Because we got plenty of them. Good God.
So this is something that I think I really want our listeners to wrap their heads around. And this is going to lead to an argument I don't want to have with anybody, but I need you to understand this because these are facts.
But DeJ, never let facts get in the way of your feelings.
That's true. That's how you become a Sith Lord or whatever. Anyway, when Wayne Gretzky was playing, and to a lesser extent Mario Lemieux, mostly this is Gretzky's heyday, more so than Lemieux's heyday. Goaltending evolved a little bit towards the end of Lemieux playing. Goaltending was not what it was when Gretzky was playing hockey.
Correct.
Goaltending in a lot of weird ways was basically a joke compared to modern goaltending, where it is an insane art ever since the butterfly style was popularized.
Well, that's the point, right? Is the butterfly didn't exist. Strap on the couch cushions and never drop to your knees was goaltending.
I am not ready to say that Connor McDavid is the greatest player of all time, but he just did what Gretzky did against modern goaltenders and modern defensemen. So that is like, and that's not a hot take. That is facts. And it's very difficult to wrap your head around with the evolution of athletes. But for me, that is what I am completely in awe of.
So some of the stats that we have here then, right? Let's rattle some of these off. Connor McDavid, when he hit the 87-point mark, matched the point total of 2015 Art Ross winner Jamie Benn in 33 fewer games. McDavid became the third player in NHL history after Gretzky and Lemieux to post 30 goals and 60 assists in 50 or fewer games. So
that's the big one, I think. That's the one I want to emphasize.
Yeah. 90 points in 50 or fewer games. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, just the absurdity of that. My God. I mean, he was the first player to hit 60 assists this year when no one else had hit 50. He has at least 17 games with at least 3+ points this season. It's the second most in a single season since 05-06. And the players with 18 3-point games all did it in a full 82-game season. At his current pace, he would be the first player since Lemieux to break 150 points in a full season. I mean, you talk about, I guess in the moment, like it's a tool used a lot. In the moment, retrospectiveness, I guess. To be able to sit there and try to place yourself in the future and say, man, what I got to witness at the time. And we've talked about that a lot. The idea that we are witnessing players like Crosby, like Ovechkin, like McDavid, that we're going to be able to say for the rest of our lives to other hockey fans, we got to see those guys in their prime. Connor McDavid already is one of the DJ. I mean, even like if his career were to end today, I mean, he would have Bo Jackson status as like, well, he would have been the greatest of all time had it not been for the injuries. Like, it's incredible to think, and I get that, like, okay, rival fan bases of other teams or whatever, but and like defensive Crosby fans or Ovechkin fans, but like, man, it's not a hot take. We're not breaking news here, but just Connor McDavid. That's all that needs to be said. Connor McDavid, you will remember this time as a hockey fan for the rest of your life. And, you know, hopefully he's not anywhere close to being done.
When thinking of, and so I can't stress this enough, and because this is a long conversation, it doesn't need to be had because it's pointless. But I think Connor McDavid is so good right now and so much better than everybody else right now. The only player in all of professional sports right now you can even remotely compare Connor McDavid to is Mike Trout.
And even then, there might be more of an argument. Depends on who you ask.
Yeah. It's nuts. It's just crazy. It's a treat. Watch Oilers games. They're finally putting them on at a reasonable hour.
And they're going to make the playoffs again, finally. I think just for the second time in McDavid's tenure, right? So,
yeah.
Aside from that, there is still other things to talk about with the Oilers here because Leon Draisaitl became the second player to reach 70 points this season, of course, behind McDavid. He did so in 49 games. So, again, Draisaitl very much overshadowed, but still very much insane. But then you get into the conversation, Deej, about their goaltending. Because Mike Smith... Who would have thought, after how he played in the bubble last year, that Mike Smith would be the guy? Because he's very much going to be the guy in the playoffs. He has been pretty damn solid this year. He's not Vezina candidate, and my God, if this Oilers team had a Vezina caliber goaltender in their mix, I mean, imagine what they could do. But I mean, Smith does have a .925 save percentage, so I don't know. Maybe you could argue Vezina candidate. You know, .925 in 30 games. Point being here, though, and I will say, too, Smith had a great play to set up McDavid and Draisaitl on the power play goal, too. But Koskinen against Vancouver allowed 4 goals on 4 shots and was pulled. Now, that was a crazy game to begin with, too. Like, you had Hamonic and Chason getting into it, McEwen and Nurse, and McEwen apparently is going to have a call from the league. But Koskinen became the first starting goalie to allow 4 goals on 4 shots and then get pulled since Don Beaupre of the Washington Capitals in a game against Pittsburgh that took place on November 24th of 1989. That's a record you don't want to even, or you don't want to match anytime soon. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I don't even know. I don't even know how to react to that. I mean, again, Koskinen now has a .900 save percentage on the season. Mike Smith is the guy. He has to be.
I mean, we both know when talking about Mikko Koskinen being bad, you can't ignore the elephant in the room, which is that the general manager was fired 2 hours after he signed the contract. Like, it was an immediate chain of events. Like, the ownership said, what? And then fired him immediately. Like, I mean...
God bless Peter Chiarelli.
Yeah, guy didn't live up to his contract. He shouldn't have signed it in the first place. I mean, I hoped he got better. I mean, I think you always hope for him to play up to his contract. But, you know, shout out to 1989, where George Michael was number 1 on the radio, and you'd still go to jail for saying ass on TV.
So, I don't know, man. It's going to be crazy to see what happens with Edmonton at this stage, just because, I mean, again, like I said, you looked at how Mike Smith performed in the bubble, and Oilers fans like, my God, we got to get a new goaltender. And you stick with the same 2. And, yeah, it's you're going to be relying on Mike Smith. If he can play like he's played, they got a shot. But that's a pretty big if with his inconsistencies at times. But good for Mike Smith, though, to have the season that he's had at his age. We'll look ahead here to Winnipeg as well. Not too many talking points for the Jets. I mean, they have clinched a playoff spot. After losing like 7 in a row, they finally win one to clinch a playoff spot. They have 3 wins in their last 10 games. And I've talked about it on the show before. You look at it now. They have a game at hand on Montreal, but are just 2 points above them. I still say if you're the Jets, don't be afraid of falling to the 4th spot. Because again, I read off that stat line. Connor McDavid, while he's essentially eviscerated everybody, in particular, Connor McDavid has had a field day against the Winnipeg Jets. I think the Jets might have a better shot against Toronto in round 1 than they have against Edmonton. But the problem, of course, for the Jets is they've had some injuries. There's been some turmoil this season. It's been a good year for them to make the playoffs. I think a lot of people had them on the outside looking in. Like I said, Calgary and Vancouver very much in the mix at the beginning of the year. So it's still been a good season. But boy, is it tough to have some optimism at this stage, I think, if you're a Jets fan, for just how poorly the last couple of weeks have gone heading into the playoffs. They do have 4 games left, though, to turn it around to try to get some momentum back on their side.
Yeah. And I know, personally, I was really hoping for a Montreal-Toronto first round. And we will probably still see that. But it's a lot closer to 50-50 odds than I think it should be at this point. With Winnipeg going 3-7-0 in their last 10 and no signs of them pulling up this very slowly. Nosedive. That's a perfect word. Yeah, they're not pulling out of this nosedive anytime soon, and it's baffling. I'm sure I used the exact same word the last time we brought it up. It does not make sense for this team to just have the rug completely pulled out from under them like this.
So with that, we'll move on to who will be, definitely in the playoff mix here. Could be as high as the 3rd seed. We'll find out. But of course, we started off this podcast with, Habs fans talking about, oh my God, we're so screwed. The Habs are still going to be fine. They're going to make the playoffs. Yes, they've, 500 hockey as of late. But here's the difference maker, of course. He's arrived. It's Cole Caulfield, who, of course, scored his first 2 career goals, both overtime game winners, the first player in NHL history to do that. To have his first 2 goals be back-to-back OT winners. And look, much like Nick Suzuki was last year, that's Cole Caulfield this year in terms of, again, you talk about what is essentially an internal deadline pickup. That is Cole Caulfield. He is unreal. His shot is unreal. He's never going back to the AHL. I can't imagine that happening. And then you still have someone like Suzuki, who's great too, for that matter. Yeah, Montreal is set up very, very well right now to make the playoffs. What they do from there, who knows? But again, it is a positive that this team is going to make the playoffs when at a time it was, a bit of a toss-up.
Yeah, I agree. I think this emergence of Cole Caulfield goes back to my original point where this is a team where you've got Tyler Toffoli and nobody else. Well, that's not exactly true. I know I said that earlier. It's not exactly true. Depending on how Cole Caulfield shows up in the playoffs, this team could be very close to meeting the requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. So aside from that, then we have the 3 teams that are going to be on the outs looking in. I'll mention Ottawa here first because there's less to talk about, but of course they're officially out. Calgary. Now, again, we have often been asked, hey, what about the expansion draft? The expansion draft, again, give it time until we get closer. But Milan Lucic did waive his no-movement clause for the Seattle expansion. The contract itself, though, is likely a no-movement clause. I can't imagine Seattle's going to take him unless Calgary says, hey, we'll give you this to make sure that you take Milan Lucic. And I think Luch would be a good locker room guy for the Kraken to have out of the gates. But at the very least, if this play, results in Lucic staying, it does open up a spot for Lucic to essentially allow Calgary to protect somebody else. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, certainly a team player to be able to waive his no-movement clause. And again, going to Seattle might be a better situation than Calgary next year at that stage. But yeah, for the most part, when it comes to the expansion draft stuff, give it time.
Yeah, I think I immediately after the show ends, before I even put it online, I think I'm going to go open up Photoshop. I'm going to patent, trademark, and design my Lucic the Kraken t-shirts. And then I can go retire on an island because it's great.
Oh, God. And with that...
And not just any island. Talking about Bridgeport. With the Tigers.
And with that, there is an elephant in the room that we haven't talked about at all in the past couple of episodes, and we're still not going to get into it, right? With Vancouver, there's obviously one talking point aside from the fact that they have 3 wins in their last 10, and it's been a brutal season. Jake Virtanen, we're just not going to discuss it right now because it is not worth discussing in the sense of we do not know. We don't. It is my opinion, in circumstances like this, you wait for it to play out, make your judgments at the end. It's not worth picking sides. And really, some people might view this standpoint as like, oh, well, you're not standing with the accuser. I'm not saying she's a liar. I'm not. I'm saying let it play out. It's going to go one way or another. We'll see what happens. Right now, Jake Virtanen's not playing hockey. There's a chance he's never going to play hockey again. We'll see how it plays out when it comes to that situation.
I mean, what I'll say on this is if you listen to my bonus episodes and my comments on the Deshaun Watson thing, it was wait until there's if this is real, there'll be an official investigation, and
which there is
faith in the official investigation. This situation, there's an official investigation. So I think there's nothing to say other than police are on it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people are like, hey, are you still going to mention that? And again, it's worth mentioning, I suppose, because it is the elephant in the room with the Canucks. But all things considered, that is what it is. Deej, do we have anything we can bring up here before we wrap up the show to kind of get it back on track? Didn't mean to have that be kind of the last thing.
No.
But
all right, a couple. I've got a few fun facts to kind of separate the very. There's the brake screeching there in Vancouver. People bring this up all the time. Riley Smith taken by the Vegas Golden Knights for a fourth. Do you know what happened to that fourth?
Wait, can you repeat that?
So I mentioned earlier, the Panthers, they got a fourth back from Vegas for Riley Smith. And what's widely considered one of the worst, to borrow a term from baseball, GM boners of all time. Do you know what happened to that fourth?
It became a player who just debuted for the Cats, is my guess.
No, you're incorrect. That's right, Tougie. It turned into half of Mike Hoffman when paired with a second. It wasn't that bad, I guess. I think. I don't know. That said, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably heavily invested in Dogecoin, and you've noticed that it's gone up 16, 17 cents since we started recording. And you're going to buy yourself a brand new Ferrari. And you're going to go take out that Ferrari. You're going to rev it in front of a crowd. You're going to try and find a mate. And you know what you should do? You should use code Tougie, Tougie, for 20% off at Manscaped, manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you.
The lawn mower 4.0. Sleek, well-designed, and optimized trimmer. Guys, we are, Deej and I, 2 of the first people to try the 4.0. Craftsmanship, the details. It's on a different level. I could take it out of the box, but it's mine. You got to get one of your own, and you can. 20% off. Code Tougie at manscaped.com. Deej, they have engineered the ultimate groin and body trimmer. Focusing on intelligent functionality, incredibly comfortable grooming experience, 4th generation. I now feel confident shaving my boys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. It'll make your dong look huge. Buy one. Code Tougie, Tougie, 20% off.
An LED spotlight in case you get lost in the dark?
Honestly, though, okay, so like all advertising, like fully sold on this aside
Wireless
or whatever.
charging?
The LED spotlight is it's legitimately one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. That way you can, you'll see when you get one. Code Tougie, Tougie. I've been Dej. This has been Tougie. This has been DeJ Audio, a DeJ Audio podcast. DeJ Audio, you're listening to it.
Your balls will thank you.
And your balls will thank you. I'll see you next week.